guys. Now, I promise you, just like yesterday, I keep things short. So give me your attention for a little bit, and I promise I won't take a long time. But I want you guys to pay attention to this because this is very important. It's the title of the talk today is called "Mankind's Yes to God," and it comes from a book called "The Faith" by Dr. Clark Carlton, who is an Orthodox convert. And we'll get into it. We'll talk about it a little bit. So he has a quote in this chapter, and the quote says, "A man, even one intimately united with God, could not save humanity and raise us up to the perfect participation in the life of God. Only God could renew his image in man and impart onto him the fullness of divine life. If Christ is not God, then our salvation is an illusion." Now, I want you guys to explain that to me. What does this mean? Or you don't even have to talk in the microphone. You just, what does it mean? It's right there on the board, or not on the board, on the screen. Yeah. Go ahead and read it and let me know, what do you think it means? What do you think he's saying?
If Christ is not God, then our salvation is an illusion.
Okay, so he's saying that Christ needs to be God. What about, could God the Father then save us? Could God the Father save us? Or does it have to be Christ? How many think the Father, in his ability as the Father, could save mankind? Raise your hand. Okay. How many think the Son has to be the one that saves us? Raise your hand. Okay. Perfect. So the Son has to save us, and the Son has to save us. And the key part to that is the first sentence where he says, "A man, even one intimately united with God, could not save humanity and raise us up to the perfect participation in the life of God." So in order for mankind to be saved, a human being has to pay the price to death for the sin that Adam and Eve committed. So the Father, not having a body, cannot save us. We need the Son. We need the incarnation of the Son. Do you guys know what incarnation means? It means the Son to take the flesh, to become a human being from the Virgin Mary, but he is God and truly man. 100% of each. I know it sounds like when someone says this is 100%, of this and 100% of that, in your mind you think, no, that's 50 and 50. But that's not the case. He was 100% God, 100% man. If I can take a little tangent for a little bit, St. Cyril has an example that he gives that makes the most sense. If I take a piece of iron, a rod of iron, it's 100% iron. But if I stick it in fire, then it takes on the attributes of that fire. It becomes red hot. So then it's 100% fire or heat. Does that make sense? Yes? No? So it could be two things. It could be both the fire or the heat, and it could also be iron. And each don't mix. They don't mingle. They're completely united. You can't separate them. But it doesn't lose its substance as iron, and it doesn't lose its the essence of it being fire. Does that make sense? Yes? Okay. Because that's very important. Because Christ has to fulfill both things. He needs to be 100% human, and he needs to be 100% divine in order to save mankind. If, say for example, Bobby, my good friend, he is, intimately united with God. Bobby will do good for himself, but it would do us no benefit, and that's why Christ is important. Okay? So, let's continue. So, the Theotokos, right? Who knows what Theotokos means? Yeah.
The Virgin.
The Virgin's Parthenos, but good. Who knows what Theotokos? Yes. Mother of God or God-bearer. Very good. So, we know that Theotokos means the God-bearer. And I think this is important because the reason why this came about was because there was a man, he was the patriarch of a city called Constantinople, and he came and he invited a bishop that came to his place, or came to his church, and he got up and began to talk about St. Mary. And he began saying all these wonderful things about St. Mary, and that patriarch that was sitting there, his name was Nestorius, he felt that that gentleman had gone, or that bishop had gone too far. And so he didn't like using the word Theotokos. He wanted to call her Christotokos, which means Christ bearer, not God bearer, because in his mind, he couldn't believe that God had a mother. So he wanted to respect Christ's humanity, but in a sense, he was kind of separating his humanity from his divinity. So it's a long story. You probably don't need to know it that well, but this is where we get the term Theotokos, because we believe that Christ is 100% God and 100% man. So if we say that she is the mother of Christ, at the same time we can say that she's the mother of God. Does that make sense? Everybody clear so far? Yes? Okay. So, an incorrect understanding of Mariology. Mariology is the understanding of who St. Mary is. An incorrect understanding of Mariology will lead to an incorrect understanding of Christology, or who Christ is. So, what that means is, because Nestorius misunderstood who St. Mary was, because he was not able to understand that she was the mother of God, that led to a problem with his Christology, understanding who Christ was. And as a result, what's the word I'm looking for? He put our own salvation into question. Because remember, we said that Christ has to be 100% man and 100% God. If he is neither one of those, if we say that he's 99% God and 1% man or something like that, then our salvation is shot. It's gone. It's not true. It's not real. Does that make sense? So it's very important to understand Christology correctly, because it affects our salvation. But in order to understand our Christology, we also have to understand our Mariology, our understanding of St. Mary. And this is kind of heavy. We'll get into things that are a little bit easier, but I want you to understand why, kind of the theory behind this. And of course, I want to talk about it because this is the season. Today's the first week of which month of the Coptic year? Kiek, right? And in this month, we're obviously preparing to celebrate the Feast of the Nativity and the birth of Jesus Christ. So, when we talk about the yes, mankind's yes to God, we're going to talk about free will, obviously. Some churches view St. Mary as a channel or a passageway that Christ used. Some will go far enough. I've heard someone compare St. Mary to an egg, where you take the inside of the egg, the useful part, which would be Christ, and you discard the shell after you're done with it, which would be St. Mary. So, of course, that is not a correct understanding of who St. Mary was. It's almost as if at this point she doesn't have a free will. But of course, we don't believe that. As Christians, we believe that she was approached by the angel. And so free will is very important in understanding St. Mary's role in the role of salvation, or in the story of salvation. So man has God-given free will, meaning that man can either say yes or man can say no. So if I ask you, for example, to go outside and walk into the middle of the street and wait there till a car hits you, you have the option of saying yes, or you have the option of saying no. And that's what your free will is. Okay? Christ took his humanity from the Virgin, becoming in her what he was not, so that we can become what he is. Focus again on this part. Christ took his humanity from the Virgin Mary, becoming in her what he was not. So what was he not that he took from her? Human. So he took his humanity, what he was not, so that we can become what? So we can become what he is. And what is that? What is he? What is he? Well, he's Christ, yes. But what is he? What other aspect of him that he's trying to give us? Salvation, or become like God, right? We're going to become like him in the sense of we're going to share in the life of the Holy Trinity, right? And why are we trying to reach that? What happened to us? as mankind. What happened to mankind in the very, very beginning after creation? We sinned, and then what happened after we sinned? Say? No? So we sinned, and obviously there was separation between mankind and God, right? And so the coming of Christ is supposed to be the reconciliation, or the bringing together, the making up, so to speak, of our relationship with God. So again, Christ took his humanity from the Virgin, becoming in her what he was not, so that we can become what he is. If you guys attend Tazbahah, some of the deacons, if you attend some of the Tazbahahs during the week, we have one of the Theotokos that says he took what is ours and gave us what is his. We praise and glorify him and exceedingly exalt him. So he took what is ours, which is our humanity, our flesh, and gave us what is his, which is that relationship with God the Father, the communion of love with the Holy Trinity. Does that make sense so far? Yes? All right. Let's move on. So St. Augustine says, or the Blessed Augustine says, God who created you without you cannot save you without you. And what he's meaning by this quote is he's underscoring the importance of free will. God who created you without you, meaning that, at the beginning when your parents decided to have a child and they were going to, have you were created without your will. You did not decide, I decide I'm going to become a human today. You were created of someone else's will, God's will. He created us without us, but at the same time, God cannot save us without us, meaning he can't infringe on our free will. He can't say, Bobby, I love you so much to the point that I'm going to save you even if you don't want to be saved. Does that make sense? We have to choose him, right? So, when we talk about the coming of Christ, and we're going to tie all this together. When we talk about the coming of Christ, it's a historical process. What I mean by that is there was a preparation that went into all of this. Christ didn't come just randomly. No, he chose that specific time that he came for certain reasons. So the first part of that historic process is he chose a people first. Who were the people of God? Was it the Native Americans? Huh? I can't hear you. No, not the disciples. Before them. The Israelites, right. So he chose the Israelites. Why did he choose the Israelites? What was important about the Israelites? Anybody know? Why do we call Israel the children of God, or the people of God? Any reason? Because the covenant. God has a covenant with them. And when he chose the people, he gave them a law. Let me ask you this. When you think about our traffic laws, what is the purpose of the law? Keep you safe. Good. And what does any law do? It teaches you the right between what? Right or wrong, legal and illegal, right? So when God gives the law to the people of Israel, he's teaching them the difference between what is moral and what is amoral, what is right and what is wrong, right? So he gives them the 10 Commandments. Love the Lord your God, you shall have no other gods before me, etc., etc., etc. Do not commit adultery, do not steal, all that stuff. And the purpose of that is to help mankind understand the difference between right and wrong. And then what the law eventually does is it teaches mankind that if I try to live according to all the precepts of the law, at some point I'm going to fall short. That's really the purpose of the law. Do you think anybody can fulfill the entire law of the Old Testament? No. Nobody could fulfill the law. So the law points out the weakness of humanity and the righteousness of God, meaning that God is righteous and above everything else, and we as humans, we're weak and we need help, right? So then he also gave them the priesthood. Why is the priesthood important? What did the priests in the Old Testament do? They offered sacrifices. Okay, good. What kind of sacrifices? Was it Orban on an altar? No, it was a lamb. Okay. They had lots of other sacrifices. They offered bulls. They offered turtle doves, all kinds of things. Right? So that was the priesthood. And they served before God. And of course, he gave the prophets. Who were the prophets? Did the prophets come before or after the law? After the law, right. They came after the law, and what they did was, a lot of times they had obviously prophecies, which prophecy means speak forth. So they either spoke about something that was happening to the people at that time, or they saw something in the future that was going to happen. Most of the time it had to do with the coming of Christ. Sometimes it had to do with things that would happen to Israel as itself. So God prepared Israel, and the whole purpose of Israel was that through Israel was going to come who? Who's going to come through Israel? Jesus Christ. Good job. Good guess. So, again, the purpose of the children of Israel was that through Israel was going to come Jesus Christ. So he prepared first a people. Before his coming, he had a people that were dedicated to him, that knew the difference between right and wrong. They had a priesthood that offered sacrifices. They had prophets that prophesied about his coming, that taught us about who God was, and that was the first step. The second important thing was he had to prepare the world. Now, during the time of Christ, who was in charge of most of the known world? What empire? Roman Empire. Perfect. Good job. And so you had, and this is kind of important because you had one empire that controlled most of the known world, and most of it was basically the same culture, which was the Hellenistic culture, or Greek culture, and there was a common language, and there were many roads. And so if you have, say for example, the disciples that came, it's easier for them now to go through the Roman Empire. They have a system that they already understand. They have a language that most people know, and they have roads that are easily accessible, travel that's, boats that can go from here to there. Now, if Christ had come earlier, before all that, before the world was united, it would have been much more difficult for that message or the gospel to make its way out. So not only did he prepare a people for himself, but he also prepared the world for his coming. So it's a historical process. And the Virgin Mary is basically the culmination of all of this. So she's, the height or the pinnacle of God getting his people ready and the world ready. So once both of those are ready, then the Virgin Mary comes into play. So now we have the Annunciation. When Archangel Gabriel comes to Saint Mary, and he gives her the good tidings, and he tells her that you're going to become the mother of the Son of God, the Most High. Could she have said no? Could Saint Mary have said no? Raise your hand if you think she could have said no, or raise your hand if you think she could have, if she had to say yes. Who thinks that she could have said no? Who thinks she had to say yes? Okay. So she could have said no. And why could she have said no? Because she had free will. That's right. So she wasn't just simply a passageway or a channel that was used. She was a human being like us. And she was the perfect human being for the coming of Christ. And she had free will. And she chose to say yes. And she said, "Behold, the maidservant of the Lord." Now, some other churches, as we said, teach that that the Virgin Mary was basically a tool that removes her free will and her yes to God, which is not accurate and it's not right. And we have to understand that, especially during this time of the year, because we are obviously following her example of saying yes. So St. Mary's yes. She says, "Behold the maidservant of the Lord, let it be to me according to your word." So that is basically her yes. "Behold the maidservant of the Lord, let it be to me according to your word." So St. Mary's yes is the foundation of our salvation and the beginning of all of our yeses. Do you understand what I mean by that? If she is the foundation of our salvation, obviously our salvation, she's an integral part of our salvation because God chose to come through her. And St. Mary's yes is the foundation of all of our yeses. meaning that when she says yes, she gave us all the ability in return to also say yes, right? Because St. Mary is not saying yes on our behalf. She said yes on mankind's behalf, and now it's our responsibility as individuals to say yes to God's calling for us. And obviously, she's the rejoicing of all of mankind. Do we have a hymn that's similar to that? What is it? Yeah, or Rashine. Yeah. So, and this is the last slide. So I told you guys I'd keep it short. So, Saint Mary is obviously the new Eve. We know that from the Old Testament. It is no coincidence that the Holy Bible notes that Eve ate first and then Adam, and that the woman sinned first. So we know that Eve was the one who offered the apple or the forbidden fruit to Adam, but at the same time in the New Testament we also know that it was Saint Mary who obeyed God to the point that salvation came through her. So where we believe that Christ is the new Adam, we also believe that Saint Mary is the new Eve who fulfilled, the shortcomings of our mother Eve. So Saint Mary's yes is the answer to Eve's no, and no here being when the snake or the serpent came and approached Eve, and he said to her, "Eat of this tree, and you will be like God." Essentially what she was saying was no to God's command, no to God's judgments, and no to God's communion of love, and saying, I will become like God without God. So she said no to God, and St. Mary obviously said yes. So the point of this is, when we're here in church and we think about what St. Mary did and how she said yes and how she's the foundation of all of our yeses, my question now is, where is our yes in our life? And this is a good time to obviously focus on that during the fast. During the fast, because we pray a little bit more, obviously, we also have more periods of where the body feels weaker because we're not eating certain foods, we're abstaining from meat. Yes, we can have fish. We can fast for a little bit longer during the day. That strengthens our spirit. And so obviously during this time we should be focusing on where is our yes in our lives. If God's approaching us, and obviously asking that we give him something. Yesterday we spoke about priorities. If that's on our mind, then we have to commit. We have to say yes. And that's really about it. Do you guys have any questions or thoughts or concerns so far? No? You understand everything? Yes. Okay, so the question is, if St. Mary said no, would God have another person in mind? Obviously, yes, he would have figured out a way to have come and saved us, but St. Mary being the person that she is, and God's foreknowledge, he obviously knew that she would say yes. It's his will that all of us are saved and come to the knowledge of truth, but not everybody says yes. But he knew that St. Mary would say yes, obviously, because she was perfect in many ways. Yes, she still needed to be saved, and yes, she still needed Christ as her Savior, but she was so perfect in many other ways that when she was approached, he knew for sure that she would say yes. Does that make sense? But she still had the ability to say no if she wanted to, but she obviously chose the right thing. Does that make sense?
Why like God, like he's God, why does he need a mother, like from earth and like human?
Perfect. So do you remember what we said about God needing to be 100% man and 100% God? Okay. So when God gave the command that we should not eat of the tree, or we should surely, or by death surely we shall die, who was that command given to? Was it given to mankind, or was it given to mankind and God? Mankind, right? So, if mankind sins, who needs to pay the price? Mankind. Can someone else pay the price for you? No. Mankind has to pay the price that's required to death. So Christ took flesh because he has to be mankind. So part of the thing is, when St. Athanasius wrote his book on the Incarnation, he said there's something called the divine dilemma. So God, when he gave the commandment, he said, if you eat of this fruit, you will die, and mankind eats. So he's got two options. Either he has to be the just judge, or he has to be merciful. Okay? If he is merciful, and he doesn't enforce the punishment, then is he just? Will he be just? Okay. Let me reword it in a way that you might understand it a little bit better. If someone, let's say for example, you're driving your car, and you're driving really fast, and you know that you're going over the speed limit, and you get a ticket, and you go before the judge, and you say, and he asks you, were you speeding? And you say, yes, I was. Okay? Now, he has two options. Either he could be merciful to you and say, okay, you could go, and you didn't commit anything wrong, or he can say to you, well, you have to pay the fine that comes with that, right? Now, if he says to you, or if he decides to be merciful, yes, you didn't commit that crime, I'm going to let you go. Is he being just? Is he being fair? Or is he upholding the law? I can't hear you.
It's not being fair because there's other people that overspeeded and then they pay the fee. So why I'm not going to pay the fee like them? Exactly. So God has to be just, right? So it's very important for God. One of his attributes is that he is just. He is not only the lawgiver, but he upholds the law, and he has to be just, because if he overlooks this mishap or whatever it is, he can no longer be just. But at the same time, he doesn't want to condemn mankind to death and just leave them there. He has to come up with a plan for saving mankind. And the plan for saving mankind is somebody has to pay the price for that. And that somebody is Christ, the second person of the Holy Trinity. So that's why Christ comes as man through the Virgin Mary, dies on the behalf of mankind, pays that debt to death, and then he changes, as St. Gregory says in the liturgy, changes our punishment into salvation. Meaning that, yes, there is death. Yes, we have to go through death, but then he provides a way out, which is the resurrection. So the resurrection of Christ isn't something that we look at, Christ resurrected, and it's it. No, Christ resurrected, but he is, as the Bible says, the first fruits of those who fell asleep. Meaning that he's the first one to rise like that as a human being and receive a glorified body, but everybody who believes in him will rise like him. During the last day, there's going to be a mass resurrection, and we believe that's what's going to happen for us, because Christ is our brother in a sense, as the book of Hebrews puts it. So he is our brother because he shares our flesh like us. He shared our flesh like us, and he rose from the dead, and he laid the foundation or the pathway that we're going to follow, and we're going to rise with him from the dead in the last day. And that death that we entered into, he provided salvation and a way out, so that yes, he is still just because the punishment was still there, but he is also merciful because he chose to save us while paying the price. Does that make sense? Anybody have any questions? Or is anything not clear of what I said? Because it's important that you guys understand this. Very important part of our faith. This is the whole reason why we come to church. Does anybody have any questions or something that they don't understand about what we said?
Michael, what's the plan?